The majesty of aviation, with its promises of connecting continents and defying the skies, often hides an inherent vulnerability. Few calamities move humanity with the intensity of an aerial tragedy. These events, whether a product of a catastrophic technical failure, an imperceptible human error, or, on rare occasions, of deliberate acts of malice, usually leave a trail of devastation and a desolate number of survivors. When there are any, the image of an aerial apparatus, a machine designed for weightlessness and speed, plummeting from the heights, is one of the most impactful and painful visions. Despite its imposing size and technological sophistication, these marvels of engineering are, in essence, fragile structures before the extreme forces of an impact. A fall from a considerable altitude or a frustrated landing can annihilate suddenly the life of all aboard, transforming the dream of flight into an unfathomable nightmare. Perhaps it is this combination of the greatness of the machine and the brutality of its end what captures so powerfully our attention when such sinister events occur, leaving a footprint of horror and fascination within the complex and often enigmatic casuistry of aerial accidents. There exists an expedient that stands out for its recurrent and chilling particularity, that of flight number 191. This identifier, apparently innocuous, hides a series of events that defy statistical logic and mere chance. For the general public, the numbering of flights is an administrative detail, a combination of letters and numbers that designates a specific route. Each airline uses its own system to code the trajectory and the final destination of its flights. Thus, a flight that unites, for example, the vibrant metropolis of San Francisco with the iconic New York, or the connection between the bustling airport of Dallas and the historic city of Mexico, possesses a unique and pre-established nomenclature. These designations do not fluctuate daily, but rather identify a fixed route, allowing companies and passengers to know with exactitude the trajectory. For example, Flight 428 could be the daily link between Mangano Airport and Fulano Airport, independently of the specific aircraft that covers it that day. The flight identifier refers to the route, not to the airplane. The same flight, like 428, can be operated by distinct aircraft on consecutive days, maintaining its identity as an unalterable route. Flight 191 of American Airlines was precisely one of these routine trajectories. Its habitual itinerary carried it from the busy O'Hare International Airport of Chicago to the sunny Los Angeles International Airport, a flight scheduled with an almost metronomic regularity, expected by business travelers and tourists equally. However, the history of this flight number, 191, is marked by a series of somber particularities that distinguish it from any other, and that the course of this narrative will be unveiling. On the 25th of May of 1979, Flight 191 was preparing for its takeoff from Chicago. The aircraft assigned for this trajectory was a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, an apparatus of wide fuselage, considered in its moment as a jewel of aeronautical engineering. Its silver fuselage, gleaming under the afternoon sun, carried with pride the distinctive emblems of American Airlines in blue and red tones, projecting an image of power and security. For 1979, the DC-10 was a relatively new model, a symbol of aerial modernity. It was characterized by its configuration of 3 engines, one powerful under each wing, and a third engine strategically integrated in the base of the vertical tail stabilizer. These 3 massive turbines conferred to the airplane an appearance of majesty and a formidable propulsion capacity. The interior of the DC-10 was equally impressive. With its design of wide cabin or broad cabin, it offered to the passengers a generous space, with 2 aisles that separated the rows of seats, one on each side of the cabin and a central section. It was a giant of the air, and this particular exemplar was young, with few years of active service, which made it even more promising. That day, the crew of Flight 191, composed by highly experienced professionals, requested permission to initiate the taxiing, the maneuver that carries the airplane from the parking platform to the threshold of the takeoff runway. The apparatus displaced itself with fluidity along the auxiliary runways, while in the command cabin, the atmosphere was of professionalism and calm. The cabin crew, from the pilots to the flight attendants, was known for its vast experience and its impeccable record. The airplane arrived at the waiting point of the runway. It was approximately 2:50 of the afternoon. The schedule was being fulfilled with precision. From the control tower, the final authorization for takeoff was emitted, freeing the runway for Flight 191. The meteorological conditions could not be more propitious. A sunny day of May, warm and clear, promising a tranquil flight. The aircraft, immaculate and in apparent perfect state, awaited its turn. At the command of this imposing machine was found Captain Walter Lux, a veteran of aviation with thousands of hours of flight. Next to him, First Officer James Dillard, equally competent, and Flight Engineer Alfred Udewitt completed the vital triad of the cabin. Aboard, another 11 members of the cabin crew took charge of the well-being of the 258 passengers that filled the airplane. The last preparations were carried out. In the variegated cabin, replete with luminous indicators, dials, and buttons, a last and meticulous check of the systems was realized. The final instructions were given, and Captain Lux initiated the takeoff sequence. The takeoff process of an airplane of this magnitude is a ballet of power and precision. It consists in the progressive acceleration of the engines until their maximum thrust power. The airplane begins to roll along the runway, gaining speed in a constant form. The 3 Pratt & Whitney engines roared, releasing a colossal force that made the structure of the airplane vibrate. The deafening sound of the turbines at full performance was a palpable manifestation of the contained energy. As the speed increased, the point of V1 was reached, the decision speed beyond which the takeoff cannot be aborted. Shortly after, the order of rotation was given, and the nose of the airplane began to elevate itself, separating slowly from the earth, while the rest of the fuselage followed its run, preparing for the ascent. The pilots, feeling in the controls the immense power of the apparatus, noticed a slight vibration, a usual phenomenon. But, suddenly, in an abrupt and terrifying manner, the vibration intensified, turning anomalous. A dull roar, not foreseen, resonated. In fractions of a second, control was lost. The airplane began to bank itself in a drastic and uncontrollable form towards the left. In an unexpected and brutal banking, despite the desperate efforts of the experienced crew to correct the trajectory and recover control, the gigantic DC-10 continued its macabre turn. The majestic apparatus inverted itself completely, its wings pointing to the sky at an impossible angle, and it plummeted violently towards Earth. The impact was devastating. Barely 15 seconds had transpired from the moment in which it had elevated itself from the runway. The airplane had not managed to ascend beyond some 30 meters of height when that frightful turn condemned it. It fell with an enormous force at scarce 1,000 meters from the end of the runway, impacting against a row of hangars and destroying itself in the act. The enormous load of aviation fuel that it carried, essential for its long trajectory, inflamed itself instantly at the moment of impact, generating a colossal fireball, an explosion of terrifying proportions that devoured the remains of the apparatus. The catastrophe was total. The totality of the 258 passengers, together with the 13 members of the crew, perished in the act. Furthermore, 2 persons that were found in one of the hangars on land also lost their life, reached by the fury of the disaster. The authorities, shocked, confronted a scenario of desolation without precedents. The case of Flight 191 of American Airlines converted itself, for 1979, into the most deadly aerial accident in the history of the United States that involved a single aircraft. Its dramatism was seen accentuated by an extraordinary circumstance. The fatal moment of takeoff had been captured in a photograph. From the exterior of the airport, an aviation enthusiast, who dedicated himself to photographing takeoffs, immortalized involuntarily the exact instant in which the airplane initiated its mortal turn, inverted itself, and plummeted to the ground. A terrible image, a graphic testimony of the tragedy. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA of the United States, the maximum aeronautical authority of the country, initiated immediately an exhaustive investigation. The first indications revealed a crucial and chilling detail. The airplane had lost one of its engines, the one situated on the left wing, in the first seconds of takeoff. The engine, a gigantic turbine, had detached itself from its anchorage, rotating over the wing of the airplane. In its uncontrolled movement, it had torn off the pylon, the support structure that held it firmly to the wing. This tear was not merely structural. Upon tearing off the pylon, The engine had brutally sectioned the hydraulic controls, the electrical cables, and the vital steering mechanisms. The left wing remained rendered useless, losing its functionality and its capacity to generate lift in an equilibrated manner. With the left engine lost and the wing damaged, the asymmetric power generated by the engine of the right wing and the tail engine provoked an unrecoverable forcing the airplane to that fateful banking towards the left. The mechanism of the disaster, although brutal, began to clarify itself. The subsequent investigation, profound and meticulous, unveiled the root cause: a maintenance failure. It was not a matter of an inherent defect to the design of the airplane, nor of an old or badly utilized apparatus. The problem resided in an incorrect maintenance procedure. American Airlines, as part of its safety protocols, realized periodic changes of engines in its aircraft. However, during one of these operations, the maintenance personnel had utilized an inadequate method to remove and reinstall the engine, provoking structural damages in the support pylon. A fracture imperceptible to simple sight, but critical, had been generated, which had manifested itself with catastrophic consequences at the moment of maximum tension of takeoff. The pilots, before the sudden loss of control at such low height, and with such severe structural damage, did not have any possibility of straightening the airplane, nor of saving it, nor much less the passengers. The life of all aboard extinguished itself in that infernal instant. But the history of Flight 191 does not limit itself to this tragedy, by itself harrowing. Its presence in the annals of the unusual, often related with tales of the dark side, justifies itself for a reason that goes beyond mere technical fatality. It is not a case of explicit human perversity, nor of a supernatural phenomenon in its most classic acceptation, although its aura of fatality borders it. The reason is chilling. This was not the only accident associated to flight number 191. The convention in the aeronautical industry dictates that, after a grave accident, the number of the involved flight is retired from use. It is a measure of respect, and also a form of avoiding negative associations. Therefore, in normal circumstances, there should not exist multiple accidents with the same flight number. However, the case of Flight 191 defies this norm in a disquieting manner. Going back 7 years before, until 1972, another mournful incident had overshadowed the same flight number. Flight Prin-Air 191, operated in Puerto Rico, suffered an accident with strange On this occasion, the aircraft was much smaller at the Havilland Haran, an airplane with capacity for some 20 passengers. It covered a short route connecting San Juan of Puerto Rico with Ponce, both cities within the same island. The Sinister event occurred during the nocturnal landing maneuver. When the airplane was approaching the runway and almost about to touch land, the pilot took the abrupt decision to abort the landing. He attempted desperately to elevate the aircraft, but this one did not manage to recover the necessary lift. After an abrupt and uncontrolled turn in the air, the airplane fell heavily upon the runway, disintegrating itself in the impact. Miraculously, some persons managed to survive this catastrophe, although with grave injuries. The peculiarity resided in the number. It was also Flight 191. But the sinister chain of coincidences would not stop there. 13 years after the incident of Prin-Air, and 6 years after the tragedy of American Airlines, the year 1985 would bring with itself another fatal event linked to the enigmatic number 191. Flight 191 of Delta Airlines, which covered the route between Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, suffered a catastrophic accident. The aircraft was a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, a giant of the skies, very similar in configuration to the DC-10 of American Airlines, with an elegant design and 3 engines, one under each wing and a third integrated in the tail. It was an airplane of imposing beauty, with its white fuselage and the emblematic colors of Delta. The takeoff had been realized without incidents. Aboard went 163 persons between passengers and crew members. The pilots, with a vast experience and qualified to fly this model, managed the aircraft with the habitual expertise. Fatality stalked them during the descent towards its scheduled stop at the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The airplane found itself immersed in an electrical storm. The adverse meteorological conditions were known. The control tower had maintained constant communications about the climate, and a smaller airplane, a Learjet, had landed shortly before, reporting the difficulties. However, just before touching runway, the TriStar lost lift in a sudden and dramatic form. The airplane began to fall at an alarming speed. In the cabin, the crew fought with heroism. The cabin recordings, recovered subsequently, revealed the tension and the desperation in the voices of the pilots while they attempted to apply the recovery protocols, pulling controls and emitting orders with a clear consciousness of the gravity. Despite their expertise, the airplane simply did not respond. It crashed on a nearby highway, crushing an automobile in its uncontrolled descent. Then, it continued its destructive trajectory through cultivation fields until colliding violently against some water tanks. The impact unleashed an infernal fireball. The fuel load, again, fed the flames that calcined the passengers situated from the middle of the airplane towards forward. The jet fuel, still in liquid state upon inflaming itself, spread through the cabin, converting the interior into an incinerating inferno. However, in an astonishing turn of destiny, not all perished. The rear section of the airplane, upon colliding with the water tanks, detached itself from the main fuselage. This part, now independent, turned several times and moved away from the epicenter of the fireball, offering an unsuspected refuge to a group of persons. 27 persons survived, many of them with very grave injuries and third-degree burns. But alive, Flight 191 of Delta Airlines, together with its predecessors, consolidated the somber reputation of this number as an omen of bad luck. These 3 accidents, although occurred in different years, with distinct aircraft, and in varied geographical scenarios, share a disturbing singularity: the same flight number. It is a unique case in the history of aviation, where 3 fatal tragedies associate themselves to the same identifier, defying statistics, and feeding the idea of a dark coincidence, or, for some, a veiled curse. But the oddities associated to Flight 191 go beyond mere numerology. The accident of American Airlines Flight 191 in 1979 was surrounded by circumstances that bordered the inexplicable. Captain Walter Lux, the maximum authority in the cabin that fateful day, should not have been on that flight. He had finished his shift, arriving in Chicago from Phoenix, and was disposing himself to rest. However, in the meeting room of the airline, a colleague and friend, who was scheduled to pilot Flight 191, requested an urgent favor from him. This captain had an unavoidable personal commitment and could not fly. Lux, in exchange for an extra payment and with the opportunity to fly closer to his family, with whom he wanted to spend the weekend, accepted to cover the flight. An apparently fortuitous decision with tragic consequences. Furthermore, among the passengers that were about to board Flight 191 of American Airlines was found the renowned actress Lindsay Wagner, famous for her role in the successful series of the year 70. Together with her mother, Wagner was disposing herself to document her luggage when, suddenly, a profound sensation of malaise invaded her. She expressed to her mother an unshakable aversion to getting on that airplane, despite the attempts of the counter personnel to tranquilize her, assuring her that it was a new airplane and that the captain was excellent. Lindsay refused roundly. "I am not going to get on that airplane, and I am not going to let you get on that airplane," she said to her mother with a conviction that bordered on panic. The heroine of the screen, known for her bravery, was seen overcome by an undeniable premonition. Both took their suitcases, excused themselves, and returned home, saving their lives by an inexplicable intuition. But the strangest of all the stories that orbit around Flight 191 is that of David Booth. David was a common man, an office worker without any apparent connection with the world of aviation, carrying a tranquil and happy life. However, starting from the 14th of May of 1979, his existence was invaded by a series of recurrent and disturbing nightmares. The first night, he woke up soaked in sweat, with an oppression in his chest, after dreaming with an enormous airplane of 3 engines falling to earth, and a devastating fireball. He attempted to discard it as a simple nightmare, but the following night, the dream returned, this time with greater intensity and chilling details. He returned to see the silver airplane taking off, the sudden turn, the deafening noise of the engines, and, finally, the explosion and the column of black smoke. Every night, the details turned more sharp and terrifying. The sensation of reality made itself unbearable. On the fourth night of these recurrent visions, David Booth, impelled by an urgency that he could not ignore, decided to contact the FBI. His initial account was received with incredulity and disdain. The first person that attended him dismissed him. The second threatened to call the police if he insisted, and the third labeled him as crazy. But David was persistent. Finally, a fourth operator, perhaps moved by his insistence, connected him with an investigator. Initially, the FAA suspected of a possible terrorist link, since in that epoch there had been aerial attacks perpetrated by groups like the IRA or the PLO. The initial questions were direct. Who are you? What is your name? What information do you have? David, clean of any suspicion, narrated his nightmare with luxury of details. The investigator, although skeptical, initiated a verification, contacting the FBI. The data of David Booth squared. A common man, without antecedents, employee of an office for years, living in the same house. He did not fit in the profile of a terrorist. The dreams, however, continued. Every night, David Booth relived the catastrophe. He returned to call the FAA, being again connected with the same investigator. This one, intrigued by the coherence of the account and the absence of hidden motives, began to take notes more seriously. The questions turned more specific. How is the airplane, to which David described the configuration of 3 engines? In what airport does it occur? A question to which he could not respond, for in his dreams he did not see any identification of the place. He described white buildings with windows, but without distinctive details. The FAA, in its desperation, showed him photographs of diverse airports. But David could not identify any. For his growing anguish, his dreams provided him vivid fragments of the tragedy, but they lacked the crucial information of where and when. On the 24th of May, eve of the disaster, David went to sleep and, once more, the nightmare repeated itself, this time with an even more disturbing sharpness, a sensation of ineludible imminence. On the following morning, he called the FAA with a last and desperate warning. But it was already too late. At 3 of the afternoon of that same day, Flight 191 of American Airlines crashed, confirming the premonition of David Booth in the most tragic form possible. The strange circumstances do not limit themselves to Flight 191 of American Airlines. The incident of Prinair in Puerto Rico also kept its own singularities. The flight had developed itself with total normality until the moment of the nocturnal landing. The airport of Ponce, being regional, did not count with a control tower operated the 24 hours of the day. When the pilot approached, there was only a guard operator in charge of turning on the lights of the runway. The airplane was approaching with its own lights turned on. Everything seemed to proceed according to what was planned. However, just before touching land, the pilot aborted the landing, shouting to the co-pilot about an obstacle on the runway, a vehicle that would have appeared suddenly on a tranquil and clear night without storms. The pilot attempted to realize a go-around with maximum power, but the maneuver was precipitated. The airplane lost lift, fell, and disintegrated itself. The initial investigation pointed to an unauthorized vehicle on the runway as cause, but the truth was more disquieting. The posterior investigations demonstrated in a conclusive manner that there was absolutely nothing on the runway. No trace of vehicles nor of alien personnel was found. The airport was completely fenced, and the last employee had abandoned the runway area half an hour before. The phantom vehicle converted itself into one more piece of the enigma of 191. Flight 191 of Delta Airlines also was marked by disquieting elements. Although the accident was attributed officially to a wind shear, a meteorological phenomena little understood in the years 80, which was not detected by the alert systems of the airplanes of the epoch, the coincidences persist. A smaller airplane that landed only 2 minutes before did not report similar problems. The last recordings of the cabin of the TriStar reveal unusual comments on the part of the pilot, a sensation of something more beyond the merely technical. And, just like in the case of American Airlines, with Lindsay Wagner, several passengers scheduled for the Delta flight experienced a sudden and inexplicable reluctance to board, canceling their trips at the last moment. Even the very pilot of Flight 191 of Delta, according to what is said, confided to his wife before the departure a strange sensation of the flight number 191 has converted itself thus into a true epicenter of calamities and mysteries. These 3 accidents that cost the life to hundreds of persons do not only share a tragic numeric identifier, but rather are imbued with inexplicable premonitions, last-minute decisions that altered destinies, and unexplained phenomena. From the captain that should not have flown, but that got on the airplane to find his end, until the passengers that, guided by a profound intuition, avoided a fatal destiny, passing through the prophetic visions of a man-alien to aviation and the phantom vehicles on the runways. Flight 191, in all its manifestations, seems to be enveloped in a mantle of misfortune, an enigma, a dark reminder that, at times, reality can be stranger and more disturbing than fiction.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, leave your comment, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes. Your support helps us keep creating more content like this. See you in the next episode.